Hello, everyone. Welcome to session 13, our last session of the course about the foremost Therīs of old. Today, we are talking about Tulananda, the nun who is foremost in misbehavior. And she is a very, very fascinating nun. She is one of my favorite nuns. So I'm very excited for the course today. And as usual, we will start with chanting the Namo Tassa. And feel free to join me if you like. Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa. Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa. Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa. Buddhaṃ Dhammāṃ Sanghāṃ Namasami. So it seems we are a small group today, but that's okay. Maybe more people will join us. Otherwise, they will catch up with the recording. And I will now share my screen as usual, and then we can start. So hopefully you can see this now. And so today, as mentioned, we are talking about Tulananda. Tulananda is the foremost in misbehavior. She is considered the epitome of a bad nun, but that's not what I want to focus on today. Tulananda is such a multifaceted character, and today I want to focus on the other aspects of her. So first of all, I'm assuming that most people won't be too familiar with her because she features mainly in the Vinyas. She very, very rarely only occurs in the suttas. So I'm thinking most people won't know her too much. So I want to introduce her character, her family, her skills, her life, just getting to know her a little bit. And then I want to focus on Tulananda interacting with men and with bhikkhus, because obviously in our course, we are talking about the status of women, the role of women in society back then. So by looking at the gender relations, I think that should be quite interesting. And Tulananda also, she's a very special character. She interacts with men in a way we haven't seen so far in our course. So I really want to show that kind of woman also. And then finally, we are going to have a look at Tulananda interacting with Mahakasapa, with Brahmins in general, and maybe if there's time also with Badakapilani, Mahakasapa's wife. So obviously that could have been a subset that could have been subsumed under the previous heading, interacting with men, because Mahakasapa obviously is a man and Brahmins are also men. But I think looking at Brahmins specifically just adds another layer, because obviously, as we have seen in the last few sessions, Brahmins had kind of special expectations of women, and the status of Brahmin women seems to have been especially low, especially over time, maybe not at the Buddha's time, but in the centuries after. So by looking at that specifically, I think we can also see a few interesting things. But first of all, let's start with Tulananda, introducing Tulananda and looking at her life. And the first story I want to show you or read with you is from the Pali Vinaya, and it goes as follows. At one time, the Buddha was staying at Savatthi in the Jeta Grove, Anathapindika's monastery. At that time, the nun Tulananda was a learned reciter, and she was confident and skilled at giving teachings. On one occasion, when the weather was cold, King Pasenadi of Kosala dressed in an expensive woolen cloak and went to Tulananda. He bowed and sat down, and Tulananda instructed, inspired, and gladdened him with a teaching. Then he said, "Venerable, please say what you need." "Great king, if you wish to give me something, then give me this woolen cloak." The king gave her his cloak. He then got up from his seat, bowed down, circumambulated her with his right side towards her, and left. People complained and criticized her. "These nuns have great desires, they are not content. How can they ask the king for his woolen cloak?" So obviously this is a Vinaya rule, so it has to have a bad twist at the end of the story, because then a rule is laid down. But that's, as I mentioned, that's not what I want to focus on. I don't want to focus on the misbehavior. I really want to focus on the other side. So here we see Tulananda. She's praised as a learned reciter. She's confident. She's skilled at giving teachings. She's an amazing teacher, it seems. And of course, this story reminds us of the story when King Pasenadi visited Khema, the nun Khema, the one foremost in wisdom. We had a look at that in the session when we talked about Khema, but the story was slightly different there. There, the story was set in a place called Thoranavatu, which is a small village, a tiny village. King Pasenadi had to stay there overnight. He was bored out of his mind. He didn't know what to do, and because no one else was there, that's why he went and he visited Khema. But here the story is very different. Here the story is set in Savatthi. This is King Pasenadi's capital. He has like literally any kind of entertainment that he wants, he has there. And we see the Buddha is also staying there. There are plenty of other monks. There are plenty of other nuns. There are plenty of other non-Buddhist renunciates. He could have gone and visited, but he purposely chose to visit Tulananda. So that shows how much respect he had for Tulananda and how amazing she was as a teacher for King Pasenadi to specifically go and see her. So it's quite different from the story with Khema. And like it really shows us how accomplished she was as a teacher. And also it seems that King Pasenadi was quite happy to give her the cloak. Like he asked her, what can I give? And then he gave it, and he was probably quite happy that he could give it. He's not the one who's criticizing. It's other people who are criticizing her for this. And so this is after the story, then the rule is laid down about not asking for a heavy cloth that is expensive. And I don't know if you remember last time when we talked about Bhatta Kapilani, we also looked at a lot of Vinaya stories, and we also looked at the story about not asking for a heavy cloth. But in other schools, it is not Tulananda who is causing the rule. It's actually Bhatta Kapilani who is causing the rule. And in those stories that we read last time, she was kind of guilt-tripping her relatives into giving those expensive cloaks, or she was buying the expensive cloak from a merchant for 100,000 with her relatives' money and stuff. So there it seemed like really, really inappropriate behavior by Bhatta Kapilani. But here in this case with Tulananda, actually it doesn't seem all that outrageous, especially because the king actually offered, and he doesn't seem to be bothered at all. So the story the story here for Tulananda is quite different from what we've seen last time with Bhatta Kapilani. And then I have another story. This is from the Dhammaguptaka Vinaya. And then there were bhikkhunīs who quarreled with each other. They went to Tulananda Bhikkhuni and said, settle this conflict for us. So they're asking her for help. And Tulananda Bhikkhuni was intelligent and wise, and she was able to settle arisen disputed matters. But in the end, she did not use skillful means to settle this disputed matter, and then those bhikkhunīs did not obtain harmony in this conflict, and they were distressed and consequently disrobed. So again, the story is taking a bad turn, but the way Tulananda is described is again in very positive ways. Like she is intelligent, she's wise, she is able to settle conflicts. And obviously the other bhikkhunīs, they look up to her, they respect her, they go to her because they think that she can help to settle this conflict. So in some ways, this story also shows us that Tulananda seems to have been respected in the sangha, or at least in part of the sangha, for her abilities. Then we have another little story, and this is from the Mulasavastivada. And here, a senior Brahmin householder praised Mahabhajapati Gautami Bhikkhuni, Upalavana Bhikkhuni, Dhammadinna Bhikkhuni, Kisa Gautami Bhikkhuni, and other such bhikkhunīs, and compared their virtuous conduct to Mount Sumeru. So that means he praised them completely over the top, like he was completely taken by their behavior. He was completely overjoyed and is praising them way, way, way too much. And Tula is obviously Tulananda. Bhikkhunīs saw it and disparaged him out of jealousy. The bhikkhunīs replied, "Noble one, why do you slander him?" Tula Bhikkhuni said, "I've gone forth from a Sakyan family. I've learned the exquisite 3 baskets. About all the discourses of the great Dhamma teacher, I can be questioned and answer without obstruction. It is suitable to extol my virtues instead of praising other people." And then they criticize her for being so jealous. So this story is fascinating for a few reasons. Number one, she's telling us that she has gone forth from a Sakyan family. So this is obviously the same family that the Buddha went forth, the same clan that the Buddha went forth. And this also tells us that she is from the Khattiya caste. This is the Khattiya clan. The Khattiya is the warrior or the aristocratic caste, as opposed, for example, to the Brahmins, to the merchants, and to the workers, which are different other castes. And the warrior caste obviously is a fairly high caste. And the Sakyans especially are well known for being very proud, somewhat arrogant people. So that fits in very well with the story here. But also that shows us like what we've seen the last few sessions. In the last few sessions, we have compared Yashodhara and the Buddha, who are both also Sakyans, who are also both from a Khattiya caste. And we have compared Bhattacapilani and Mahakasapa, who are both Brahmins. And we have seen that the relationship, even though both stories are supposed to show us ideal couples, the relationship between the husband and the wife was extremely different in a Brahmin marriage and in a Khattiya marriage. Because in the Khattiya marriage, we have seen Yashodhara and the Buddha, they are fairly equal. The woman has a lot of agency, and she's quite independent, and she's quite outspoken also. Whereas in the Brahmin marriage, Bhattacapilani really was extremely submissive, and she described herself, or her apadāna actually described herself as the shadow to his body. So it's like almost she doesn't have her own independent existence. But now we know that Tulananda is a Khattiya. So definitely she is more of a woman who is more independent, more outspoken. And we will see that throughout today's session. And this also explains why she had such a hard time interacting with Brahmins and especially interacting with Mahakasapa. And then also she tells us that she has learned the 3 baskets. This is obviously the Tipitaka, the entirety of the Buddha's teaching, the Buddhist canon. So she is really, really highly learned, very, very accomplished in the Dhamma. And now we have a story about her family background. And this is, here there's a story where there is a layman called Salha, and he wants to build a building for the nuns. And at this point, the story tells us that at that time, 4 sisters had gone forth as nuns: Nanda, Nandavati, Sundarinanda, and Tulananda. So Tulananda had several sisters in the sangha who were also bhikkhunīs. And of these, the nun Sundarinanda had gone forth when she was young, and she was beautiful, intelligent, skilled, and diligent, and she possessed good judgment in regard to doing and arranging things well. After appointing Sundarinanda to be in charge of building work, the sangha made her work with Salha. And then things go bad, and they fall in love, and bad things happen, and she has to disrobe. But anyway, what I want to show here is that Tulananda had plenty of family in the sangha. In the Pali version here, she has 3 sisters. From another Pali discourse, we know that she has another sister called Tissa. In the Sarvastivada version, we hear that she has 6 sisters, so there's 7 sisters altogether, all bhikkhunīs, and she has a bhikkhu brother. And in the Dhammaguptaka version, we also hear of several sisters, and we hear that her mother, Tissamata Bhikkhuni, is also a bhikkhuni. So we know that a large group of her family also went forth together with her and were together in the sangha with her. And that means that she had quite a lot of influence in the sangha. When you have family in the sangha, usually they look out for each other and they protect each other. And that does give you quite a bit of influence. And also we see how Sundarinanda here is described. She was intelligent, skilled, beautiful, and diligent. She possessed good judgment. So the entire family seems to have been quite accomplished. And in other versions of the story, they're also described as being very capable. Now, here is a different story that shows us different capabilities of Tulananda, different skills. And here Tulananda Bhikkhuni entered someone's house on alms round and saw that a woman had recently given birth to a son. Tulananda said, "Respectable one, may you be free from disease. Please give me food." The woman replied, "Noble one, my son cries all the time. I wish there was something I could do." The Bhikkhuni said, "You've already given birth. How do you not know the methods to care for a child?" The woman said, "Noble one, do you know the method to make him stop crying?" The Bhikkhuni said, "I know all the superior methods in the world, let alone raising a child. How could I not know that? If I teach you how to care for him, will you give me food?" The woman answered, "I will." The Bhikkhuni said, "Will you also give food to my attendant nuns?" She answered, "I will." "Will you also give food to the building guards?" She answered, "I also will." The Bhikkhuni then took the baby, put him on her hip, applied warm oil to his body, massaged him with wheat flour, bathed him in warm water, lay him down to dress him, and then the baby was able to sleep. The woman gave everything that was needed to the Bhikkhuni. So here we have Tulananda in a setting that is not a monastic setting. This is a lay setting, obviously. But even in a lay setting, Tulananda is shown to be very, very capable. Of course, she is not particularly modest. She says of herself, "I know all the superior methods in the world." But we also see she is actually very capable. She does know how to handle this baby. And then we have two very similar stories, which I have not put here, where instead of taking care of a baby, she's preparing a lavish feast for a woman who doesn't know how to cook and who is in distress. And then there is another story where she is doing housework for a woman who doesn't know how to do that and is in trouble because of that. And in all cases, she says, "Oh, I know everything. I'm very capable at everything." And then she turns out to actually also truly be very capable at what she's doing. And in the story we read just now, we saw her sister being appointed as the sangha official for doing building work. So doing building work isn't actually something that's usually associated with women's work, but we see that even there, the sister was very, very capable. So throughout the Vinaya, Tulananda and her sisters are depicted as being very, very accomplished, very capable in all the various things that they undertake. And we also see that she's not that selfish. Here she's looking out not only for herself, but she's also asking for food for her attendant nuns. She's asking for food for the building guards. She's really like taking care of the people who are under basically under her care, the people she is responsible for. So she is looking out for other people. She is not that selfish, which is one of the qualities that make a good teacher. And then we have another story. This talks about her students. And here we see Tulananda Bhikkhuni gave the going forth and the full ordination to people without limit. She did not give them names such as Buddha Rakita, Dhamma Rakita, Sangha Rakita, etc. But when she had some work to do, she called them, "Hey, students." When they heard it, they did not know whom she called. Sometimes she also called them, "Hey, Sikamana, hey, Samaneri, hey, young one." And sometimes she called them one vasa, that means 1 year ordained, up to 10 vasa, 10 years ordained. When she called them like this, they all did not know whom the teacher called. Bhikkhuni said to her, "Noble one, you've given the full ordination, but can't remember the names. Why did you create this confusion?" Thulla Bhikkhuni said, "I have many followers. How should I know all the names? So obviously this is a little over the top. Obviously as a teacher, she should know all the names. But again, what we see here is how popular she was in the sangha, how many people actually came and wanted to train with her. Like, it's not like you were forced to train with a teacher, it's people actually voluntarily coming and asking for ordination. And we have to remember this is at a time when the sangha was full of amazing teachers, when Mahapajapati was there, and Kema, and Upalavanna, and great teachers like Patachara, who we have seen as like teaching so many people. And Dhammadinna and all the other great nuns were there, and still people flocked to Tulananda in great numbers. And that again shows us how popular she was and how good she was as a teacher generally, except that she obviously didn't know the names. And I have another story here, but I think I'm skipping this one because for time constraints. But here, this is another story where we see that Tulananda is really looking out for her students and is taking good care of her students, also in providing material things, not just in teaching. So she did care for her students and did look out for the students. So what we've seen now in this first part of the course is Tulananda being very accomplished, being very learned, being highly respected, both by other bhikkhunīs and by, especially by lay people. And she had a lot of students, and she was very capable in many of the things that she did, not only in Dhamma things, but also in worldly things that need to be arranged. So she is shown as a really very independent, very capable woman. And now I want to start looking into her interacting with men, and she's doing that in a way we haven't seen so far in this course, and a way that I think is very inspiring, that we have texts that show us this. And here we have a story from the Mula Savasivada Vinaya. This is a story that also appears in many of the other Vinayas. With slightly different details, but generally a very similar story. And the story begins. Location as before. Then King Pasenadi had a great general called Capable Sword Wielder, who often went into battle. His wife remained at home, and troubled by feelings of desire, she finally had sex with a foreigner. When the husband returned and heard and knew about the affair, he lashed her with a whip. Even though she suffered, she did not learn from it and stop. The general thought, for the king of the country, I defeat other districts and make them submissive. How am I not able to discipline my own wife? Having thought this, he went and said to the king, may the king establish a rule for women. If they do not follow moral conduct, but set a dirty, defiled example, there will be the most severe punishment. The king said, that's a good thing. So the most severe punishment means capital punishment. Then at a later time, the general's wife disobeyed this national law. The husband separated from her and told the king to apply the law. The woman then went and said to the judge, I have transgressed, please spare my life. The judge said, there is no room for mercy in this matter. The woman said, if I can't avoid death, I ask for my life for 7 years. The judge said, that's not possible. Then she asked for her life for 6 years, down to 1 year, down to 7 months, down to 1 month. And finally, she asked for her life for 7 days. And the judge said, as you like. When she had been granted, she thought, my life will end in 7 days. And weeping and with tears flowing, she engaged in meritorious activities. Then Tulananda Bhikkhuni at breakfast time took her robe and bowl and entered the city on alms round. She reached that woman's house, saw her weeping and said, young woman, because of what mental pain do you cry and practice charity? She replied, because I'll die soon. The Bhikkhuni said, don't say such inauspicious words. The woman then wailed and subsequently explained the matter. The Bhikkhuni said, if that's so, why don't you give up lay life and go forth? She answered, who would take me in? The Bhikkhuni said, I'll give you the going forth. The woman then paid respect at her feet and replied, noble one, you're giving me my life. Tulananda then gave her the going forth. When General Sword Wielder heard that the evil woman had now gone forth, he said, How can she enter the city without fear? When the 7 days are over, she'll be killed. When the bhikkhuni heard these words, she took the woman to seek friends to help. They then went to the group of 12 bhikkhunīs. The group of 12 bhikkhunīs is another group of notorious bhikkhunīs. They are well known to be misbehaving nuns also. So by associating Tulananda and a group of 12, this story is making it clear that these are really, really all the bad nuns coming together. And so she went to the group of 12 and said, "This is official so-and-so's wife, who has taken refuge in the Buddha and the Dhamma and now takes refuge in you." Then they explained the matter. The group of 12 said, "This is a meritorious act, and we now support it. Who would dare to speak up? If they come, we'll defend you ourselves." Then here there's a passage that I've left out because the story is very long, where they go and inform Mahapajapati, and Mahapajapati is horrified and criticizes them badly for ordaining the nun, the woman. Then they go to Queen Srimala, and the queen is also horrified and also criticizes them badly. And then the queen Srimala, went to the king and fully explained the matter to him. The king said, "This is truly against the law, but the matter is difficult to resolve. If we follow the law and kill her, we'll harm the Buddha's teaching and incur a bad reputation. But if we now release her and repeal the punishment, this vacillation and double standard is difficult to justify." Then he had General Sword Wielder informed fully about the matter. The general repeatedly said, "There is an established strict order known to the population. How can the king want to go against the law and release a woman like this?" The king said, "It is proper to release her because she is under the rule of other people." That means she is no longer under secular law. She's now, because she's ordained, she's under the rule of renunciants, like under the Vinaya. And when the general heard this, he was very upset. How could they ordain this unlawful woman and make her go forth? So this is the story. Here we see Tulananda going directly up against the most powerful people in the country, against the king himself and against the highest general, in order to protect the life of a woman. So Tulananda is not afraid to stand up to all of these people, basically out of compassion to save the life of that woman. And of course, like in modern times, or in modern terms, for us, like we understand the story, but on the other hand, like it's totally not a cause for the death penalty if you have extramarital sex. And obviously, if the roles were reversed, if it was the general who, while he went into battle in some other district, had sex with a woman there, that wouldn't have been a problem at all. It's only the problem that the woman did that. And here we have Tulananda, who doesn't actually think that's a big deal. So against like the general moral code of that that time, she's still standing up for the woman and helping the woman and protecting the woman against sort of male, against men who are trying to claim authority over her body and over her actions. So in some way, we see that she's like an early fighter for women's rights, standing up and protecting the women and not being afraid to go up against really, really powerful people. And we see that in the end, she pulls it off. The woman does actually survive. And what we also see is that the nuns or the women who are supposed to be the good women, such as Mahapajapati and Queen Srimala, they all side with the man. They all accept the male authority over the woman's body, and they all think it's outrageous what Tulananda is doing here. So this is one of the stories I wanted to show you. Then there's another story, a little bit similar. This time it's from the Pali. And here again, the Buddha is in Savatthi. And at that time, a lay follower who had given a storehouse to the sangha of nuns had died. He had two sons, one with and one without faith and confidence in the Buddha's teaching. And they divided the father's property between them. Then the one without faith said to the other, "The storehouse is ours. let's share it out. But the one with faith responded, no, our father gave it to the sangha of nuns. A second time, they both said the same thing. And a third time, the one without faith repeated his proposal. The one with faith then thought, if I get it, I too would give it to the sangha of nuns. And he said, let's share it out. But when they shared out that storehouse, it fell to the one without faith. He then went to the nuns and said, please depart, venerables, this storehouse is mine. The nun Tulananda said to him, no, your father gave it to the sangha of nuns. Because they were unable to agree, they asked the judges to decide on the matter. They said, venerable, who knows that this was given to the sangha of nuns? So they're not really willing to get involved or to protect them. Tulananda replied, but sirs, didn't you appoint a witness who saw or heard the giving of the gift? Saying, oh, oops, it's true what the venerable says. The judges made the storehouse the property of the sangha of nuns. So here we see Tulananda is going up against the men again to protect the sangha. And the judges are unwilling to get involved or to protect the women, and only because Tulananda repeatedly pushes and pushes and reminds them that they actually had appointed a witness, and so it's quite easy for them to make that judgment. Finally, they do their job and actually protect the nuns, protect the women against that man. Then the defeated man complained and criticized the nuns. They are not ascetics, these shaven-headed sluts. How can they take my storehouse? So obviously the man doesn't take it kindly or doesn't take it well that the women have taken away his storehouse, which was never his to begin with. So now he is well, calling them names and complaining. And then Tulananda told the judges of this, and they punished him. That man then made a dwelling place for Ajivaka ascetics not far from the nuns, inciting them to abuse the nuns. So Ajivakas are naked ascetics, and obviously it's very uncomfortable for women, for bhikkhunīs, to have a bunch of naked men living close by who show this kind of threatening and abusive behavior towards them. And it's quite obvious that the man is just doing this out of spite, because just now he didn't even want to give a dwelling to the nuns, but now he's making an extra dwelling for the Ajivakas. So obviously he's just doing this to harass the nuns and make them go away. And then once again, Tulananda told the judges, and the judges jailed him. People then complained and criticized those nuns. First, the nuns take his storehouse, then they have him punished, and then they have him jailed. Now they'll have him executed. So here in this story, again, we see Tulananda standing up for the women, for the bhikkhunīs' rights to preserve their property, not to have it taken away by men. And obviously the men don't take it kindly. First of all, the judges don't want to do their job. And only because Tulananda pushes and pushes, do they finally do what they're supposed to do. But also the men don't take it kindly, being sort of beaten or being defeated by the nuns, and resort to all sort of scare tactics to get their way. But Tulananda isn't scared, and she doesn't back down. And she really again stands up for the women in this story, going up against men, and fairly powerful men again. Then we have another story. This time it shows us a different side of Tulananda. And here, location as before, then Tulananda, bhikkhuni, went to lay houses during daytime alone without a companion, and taught the Dhamma to householders. The bhikkhuni said, don't go alone to those houses during daytime. We fear that your celibacy will be in danger. So we fear that you'll get raped. And Tulananda replied, did you not see me kicking the male perfume vendor with my foot and drawing blood from his mouth? The other bhikkhuni said other people would not necessarily be intimidated like him. So this refers obviously to a story that I haven't put here because the story is very, very long. And the story goes as follows. Tulananda is on alms round, and there is a male perfume vendor, and he is attracted to her. He tries to get her to have sex with him. She's not interested, but she also can't properly get away. So she makes an appointment with him and tells him to come to her kuti, to her like monastic cabin later in the day. And then he agrees to that and lets her go. But when he comes to her kuti, she's prepared, and when he tries to grab her, she fights back, she kicks him, she punches him. He falls to the ground, she stomps on him, and then there's blood coming from his mouth. And then she screams loudly, and all the other nuns come running and see what's going on, and the man is extremely embarrassed and complains about her. So again, this is a story that very, very strongly reminds us of another nun, the nun Upalavanna. We have seen that in the session with Upalavanna that she was, even though she's the most powerful nun, the one foremost in psychic powers, she was the one who in all Vinyas was associated with rape stories or sexual harassment and being unable to defend herself. And here we have a very similar story, again, a nun being attacked in her kuti by a man who wants to rape her. But Tulananda, even though Tulananda doesn't have any special powers, but she is the bad nun, so she can stand up to the man. She's physically able to attack him, to overcome him. And I'm not condoning violence at all, but in the case where you are being attacked and almost being raped, I think it's fair enough that you use whatever force you have to protect yourself. And here, Tulananda is able to overcome that man. Not only is she physically able to do that, but she's also mentally able to stand up to a man. And I think that's very remarkable. I think that's something we haven't seen too much in the early texts so far, because if as a woman you're always told to be submissive to the man and to not question male authority, it's very hard to even conceive of the idea to fight back and to go against the man's wishes, even if the man's wish is to rape you. But Tulananda doesn't have that mental inhibition. She's actually able to confront the man and to use whatever force she has, both mental strength and also physical strength, to protect herself. And of course, for that, she's cast in the role of the bad nun. But again, I think it's very interesting that such nuns, such women are also portrayed in the Buddhist sources. And also we see how Tulananda is very self-confident about this. She is not apologetic at all. And that also gives her the confidence to freely wander around, go to lay houses. There's another story where she wanders all over northern India alone because she's not afraid, because she knows that she can deal with men if it was necessary. And then one more story about Tulananda, this time dealing with bhikkhus. And here Tulananda Bhikkhuni was traveling among the people with many bhikkhuni companions and reached a village. Outside the village, there was a bhikkhuni monastery. That day was the 15th day, an Uposatha day. So the 15th day means it is a full moon day. On the full moon day, monastics recite the precepts. This is a ceremony we always do on the moon days. And the other bhikkhunis said to Tulananda, "Venerable, as the world-honored one has said, a bhikkhuni should not do the Uposatha, so the precept recitation ceremony, in a place without bhikkhus. Please come and go with us to the bhikkhu monastery." Tulananda said, "I've learned the 3 baskets. How could I not know the Uposatha procedure? Why take the trouble to still go, wanting to inquire?" So here, this is a story that refers to the Garudhammas. We've talked about the Garudhammas in our session with Mahapajapati. We have seen that these are 8 rules that are later rules that were imposed at some point after the Buddha's passing. And they are there for the specific purpose to impose a hierarchy in the sangha and to make it clear that the bhikkhunis should be they are not equal to the monks, and that they have to submit to the male authority. And here we have a story of a nun questioning this particular Garudhamma. And we have 3 more stories about 3 other Garudamas, very, very similar stories where Tulananda says basically exactly the same thing. One is going for instruction. This is called the Ovada in Pali. This means every 2 weeks, nuns need to go for instruction, get instruction from a monk. It's another Garudama. They cannot spend the rains retreat. This is a 3-month retreat every year without bhikkhus. And they cannot do the Pavarna ceremony. This is the ceremony that ends the rains retreat without bhikkhus. And in each of these cases, Tulananda says, well, I've learned the 3 baskets, like I'm super accomplished. There's literally nothing that a monk could teach me or could tell me. So why should I ask them how to do it? Or why should I ask them to do it with us? And I think this is a very, very legitimate question. I mean, back then there were so many accomplished nuns, so many Arahant nuns, so many great teachers. Like objectively, there's no purpose for these rules, other than, you know, imposing a hierarchy on the nuns. And I think what these stories tell us is that when those rules came up, they weren't taken unquestioningly. They weren't just accepted by the sangha. There must have been a lot of debate, a lot of pushback, a lot of resistance also to those rules. But by putting the resistance into Tulananda's mouth, who is the foremost in misbehavior, then that means that every good nun or nun who wants to be a good nun who speaks up against this is automatically put into the corner with the other misbehaving nuns, and sort of makes it very, very difficult for the good nuns to speak up against the imposition of these rules. But I mean, the question is very legitimate, obviously, like, why should that be necessary if you already know the entire Tipitaka? It really doesn't make sense. But again, here we see again Tulananda questioning the authority of the men, the authority of, in this case, especially of the bhikkhus. And I see we're really running out of time, so we're skipping the last story here. This is a very interesting story. Men are really misbehaving towards bhikkhunīs, and Tulananda tricks them and overcomes them, and then she laughs at the men, and then she calls them names, and she says, "You bad people have met your match." So again, she's quite disrespectful to those men, but those men were really misbehaving in the beginning. But obviously the men don't take that kindly, being overcome by a woman. And so now we to recap what we have seen in the last chapter, we see Tulananda standing up for protecting women, protecting women's property, protecting women's rights, protecting women's lives, going up against male authority. She's not at all afraid even to go up against King Pasenadi himself. We have seen her also being able to physically defend herself if necessary, and we have seen her really questioning male authority in the sangha over the nuns. And now finally we come to Tulananda's relationship with Mahakasapa. This is a very, very famous relationship. So in all Buddhist traditions, Mahakasapa and Tulananda are enemies. They do not get along at all. The story that we're reading now is well attested across so many traditions. And I think now that we've seen how Tulananda interacts with men, I think it's very, very obvious why she would not get along with Mahakasapa. We have seen in our very first session, Mahakasapa was the one who presided over the first council. He was the one who convened it, who presided it, and the majority of the monks there were probably his supporters. He was the one who was in control over the texts after they were collected. And we see that the ideas that were expressed in the first council, they were quite misogynistic, quite sexist, and it seems that they had a real big problem with the Bhikkhuni Sangha, with the existence of women in the Sangha. So obviously, it's easy to understand why Tulananda would not get along with somebody who has views like this. And also, as I mentioned before, for the Brahmins, we have seen that last week with Father Kapilani and Mahakasapa, women were expected to be a lot more submissive. than what Tulananda as a Khattiya was used to. So that was probably another reason why Mahakasapa constantly thought that she was a really bad woman, and why Tulananda constantly thought that Mahakasapa was really, really wildly out there with his expectations of how women should behave. So we are now reading the most famous story between Tulananda and Mahakasapa, and this story also involves Ananda. Ananda, of course, we know was the sort of opponent of Mahakasapa in the first council. Ananda is very, very supportive of female practice. And the story here is set just before the first council, so after the Buddha's passing. And one other interesting detail that we can see from this is that Tulananda was still alive after the Buddha had passed. So we've seen before that many of the nuns actually had passed away when the Buddha was passing. And it seems that the female sangha was quite diminished at that point. But Tulananda was still there. And probably Tulananda was quite influential at that time in the sangha, because we have seen how big her support base was, and how many students she had, and how accomplished she was as a teacher. So I think Tulananda wasn't just a marginal figure in the female sangha at this point. And the story begins in Rajagaha. Rajagaha, of course, is the place where the first council is going to take place. Venerable Kassapa is there. Ananda is wandering in the southern hills with a large sangha of mendicants. So this shows us that Ananda was also very popular, that he had a large following here. And this is obviously somewhat of a problem for Mahakasapa, because those two are sort of a little bit struggling with each other for who gets to determine the future course of the sangha. So, but at that time, 30 of Ananda's mendicant pupils resigned the training, so that means they disrobed. And then Ananda comes to Rajagaha and goes to Kassapa, and Kassapa says to him, I've left out a little bit here because that's totally irrelevant to the story, but Kassapa now says to him, so what exactly are you doing? Wandering together with these junior mendicants. They don't guard their sense doors, they eat too much, and they're not committed to wakefulness. So these are very, very basic practices. And Mahakasapa is basically saying Ananda is a really bad teacher because his students can't even do these really basic things. It's like you're wandering about, wrecking crops and ruining families. Your following is falling apart, Reverend Ananda, and those just getting started are slipping away, yet this boy knows no bounds. So he is quite rude to Ananda, and he's not only being rude, he's even resorting to name calling. So this boy obviously refers to Ananda, and that's not meant as a compliment. And Ananda also objects to that. He says, though there are gray hairs on my head, I still can't escape being called a boy by Venerable Mahakasapa. But Mahakasapa doesn't back off. He actually doubles down and repeats the whole statement again. So here we can really see that there were definite tensions between Ananda and Kassapa in the time before the first council. And then the nun Tulananda heard a rumor that Master Mahakasapa had rebuked Master Ananda, the Videhan sage, by calling him a boy. She was upset and blurted out, how can Master Mahakasapa, who formerly followed another path, presume to rebuke Master Ananda, the Videhan sage, by calling him a boy? So obviously Tulananda is taking Ananda's side. Obviously their characters matched. Ananda is a very strong supporter of women, and Tulananda is also a very strong supporter of women. So it makes sense that those two would stick it out together. But from another point of view, this also serves as a rhetorical device to again undermine Ananda's standing in the sangha, because if Tulananda is cast in the role of a really bad nun, then associating Ananda with her means that Ananda's authority is also being undermined here, because obviously he keeps company with the bad people. Yeah, and then in the Pali version, the story continues by Mahakasapa praising himself and listing all his amazing accomplishments and constantly pointing out that Ananda doesn't have these accomplishments that Mahakasapa has, so again undermining Ananda's authority. In the Dhammaguptaka version of this story, it continues differently. It continues as follows. Then Mahakasapa said to Ananda, "You see this bhikkhuni angrily abusing me like this, Ananda. Except for the world-honored one, I don't remember having honored any other teaching outside the Buddha's Dhamma." Ananda said, "Venerable, let it go. The woman has no knowledge." Kassapa again said this 3 times, and Ananda also again said 3 times, "Let it go." When the night had passed at dawn, Kassapa put on his robes, took his bowl, and went to Rajagha and arms round. Then Tulananda bhikkhuni saw him and spat at him. So here, they're not just verbally fighting, they're not just being hostile towards each other. Now they're actually taking physical action. Tulananda goes so far as to spit at him in public. So obviously that's not good behavior, but I think besides just spitting on him, which is like inappropriate in general, we also have to remember Kassapa comes from a Brahmin family. So having bodily fluids from a woman on him, on his body, I think is like a special insult, like it's especially impure. With the Brahmin notions of ritual purity, that sort of makes him especially impure. And this story is extremely popular. We have several parallels. We have a parallel in the Mahasangika, Mahavastu. We have another spin-off story in the Pali with Tulananda's sister Tulatissa, where Tulatissa gets into a conflict with Mahakasapa. Then we have 4 spin-offs in the Salvation Kandaka. So 4 times the story where Tulananda encounters Kassapa on arms round, and 4 times she does different things to him. So obviously that was quite a popular motif in the at the time when those texts were written. So that enmity between Tulananda and Kassapa was exploited quite a bit in the Sarvastivada Bhikkhuni Kandaka. And the Sarvastivada also has those stories twice in their Samyutta Agama. So it's really a very popular, very well attested story. And we have also more stories of Tulananda and Mahakasapa really not getting along in other Vinaya stories where Tulananda is behaving really improperly towards him, like rude, he's being rude to him. And another time Kassapa is really scary to her, like he really frightens her. So there's a lot of conflict going on between those two, and I think it's very clear to see why they would not get along. And I see that I'm running out of time, and I cannot read the story with you, unfortunately, but I just want to briefly mention one additional point before we finish. And we also have stories about Tulananda interacting with other Brahmins. And here we have a story of Tulananda, there being a Brahmin who's very strict on ritual purity. And Tulananda goes to his house, and she sits on his ritually cleansed seat, which is kept really clean and pure. Even a fly is not allowed to sit on it. And she sits there with her dirty feet. And it's not only her dirty feet, she also leaves a stain of menstrual blood on his ritually cleansed seat. So that's obviously like basically the worst thing you can do to a Brahmin seat, leaving female bodily fluids on that seat. And she doesn't see anything wrong with that. Obviously, she thinks he is totally overreacting. And the Brahmin obviously is very upset. So again, we see Tulananda not respecting Brahmin notions of purity and the idea that women are in some way ritually impure. And there is a very interesting study that, or a very interesting paper written by someone called Sharat Patil. And she wrote about old matriarchal structures in northern India. So it seems that a long time before the Buddha's time, there were matriarchal clans in northern India. And Those matriarchal clans, they had priestesses, and those priestesses carried out the rituals for their clans. And they were extremely high respected, very, very independent women. They also carried out the rituals for the men. The men did not have the authority to carry out the rituals. And they were also freely wandering from place to place. They were totally unobstructed. Like they could freely wander because they were so highly respected that nobody would have dared to threaten them in any way. And then Sharapati connects those memories of the ancient matriarchal tradition with Tulananda. Like there are certain expressions we find in the Pali Vinaya connected with Tulananda that seem to imply that vocabulary seems to imply that there is a connection between her and her family and those ancient matriarchal clans, those ancient matriarchal priestesses. So it seems possible that Tulananda could have been a descendant of one of those matriarchal lineages. Obviously, at the time of the Buddha, they did no longer operate properly, but it might be that there was still a memory of that going on, which also explains why Tulananda is so independent, why she's so highly skilled, and why she is not at all scared of going up against men. Because if that memory runs in her family, then women, of course, would be a lot more empowered than the average women in society. So I thought that was an extremely interesting paper. And I see we are really running out of time, so I think it's time for me to wrap up now. So we're not going to look at Tulananda and her relationship with Padakapilani, Mahakasapa's wife. But what we have seen today is a woman who is very, very different from the women we have seen so far. She's extremely self-confident. She is not at all afraid to stand up for other women, to go up against men, to challenge men, and to really stand up for herself. And we've also come full circle in our course now with our last session. It connects very well with our first session where we've talked about the first council. And it comes up again and again, and it came up again today, Ananda and Mahakasapa and their relationship with Tulananda. So it all really, like the more stories we know and the more stories we study, the more we can see these connections between all these different nuns. We saw connections today with Mahapajapati, connections with Khema's text, connections with Uppalavana's text. And really, the more we study these ancient texts, the more they all fit together, and we get a much better picture of how different also the women were at that time, and also how diverse the early sangha was, and how diverse the expectations also were. The expectations from outside, Brahmins expected entirely different things of the women than Katyas, and also all the women were brought up in a completely different context. And somehow they had to all work together and had to make it work out. And obviously that does lead to conflicts. But it's quite amazing how many strong women and how many accomplished women still came out of this early Sangha and this quite difficult situation, I think. So I hope you enjoyed today's session. I hope you enjoyed seeing this completely different kind of woman that we have studied today. I know that a few people have sometimes asked for further reading. If you're interested in Tulananda, there is a really, really good paper by someone called Reiko Onuma, and she has written this paper called Bednan, Tulananda in Pali, Canonical and Commentarial Sources. This is freely available on the internet. It's really, really good. I liked it very much. It mostly talks about the Pali sources, but it talks a little bit about the other Vinayas as well. And the paper I just mentioned by Sharat Patil about the matriarchy in ancient India is called Some Aspects of Matriarchy in Ancient India, Clan Mother to Tribal Mother. This is very difficult to read, but it's also freely available on the internet for people who are interested. And now I've gone a little bit over time. I'm sorry for that. But if you have any questions or comments, then I will try my best to answer them. Tracy, did you want to say something?
Yeah. Thank you so much. I can't tell you how much I appreciate this course. Every single session has been just like opened my eyes to so many things, and I'm definitely going to be continuing to watch the classes and continue to study these themes. I did have a question. Was the rule, the story about the storehouse and kind of like arguing around like the ownership of it, that was really interesting. Is it actually like a Vinaya rule that nuns can't bring litigation in court, or?
There is a Vinaya rule, and it's quite a serious rule. It's called a sangha, which is a rule that's very complicated to clear if you commit it. That nuns are not supposed to start legal proceedings. There are some exceptions to the rule, like if you're asking for protection, you can. Also, if you're summoned to court because somebody else started a litigation or a court proceeding, there's no offense. But generally, yes, there is a rule that nuns are not supposed to do that.
And is that the same? Is there a parallel rule for the monks that they can't bring litigation as well?
No, not exactly the same. Like for us, this is in our Patimokkha, which is the monastic code, which is rules that are in there are taken quite seriously. Then, of course, we have the Kandakas, which collect like thousands of other more minor rules. And it's possible that there's a rule there that monks are discouraged from doing that. But even if it's there, I'm not sure if it's there. Even if it's there, it's a very minor rule. So yeah, that's something that's really mostly applies only to nuns. Cindy, yes, go ahead.
Hi, yes. I'd just like to say thanks again. Yeah, I've really enjoyed this course as well. Learning a lot. And yeah, like you say, wow, there's so much in there. Not all of it is easy, I guess, to come up to learn about that. Oh, okay. But then there's quite a lot of amazing, inspirational stories in there as well, and the women. Like I think, yeah, Tulananda is one of my favorite nuns too. But yeah, she must have had a really tough time as well. We can really see her warrior spirit with that. I did want to just ask, yeah, this has come up in the course before, but was it the 8 Guru Dharmas? Are they like being strictly observed and enforced, for want of a better word, today in the schools that are present in the world today, the Buddhist schools?
It really, really depends on the monastery, but yes, a lot of the monasteries observe them. In Asian countries, I would say almost all. There are a few exceptions, but certainly in Theravada countries, most of them observe them. Even in the Mahayana countries, I know that many of them observe them, but in Mahayana countries, there's also a lot of discussion about them. And I know that some communities don't observe them. In Western countries, obviously, there is a lot of discussion, but there are also plenty of communities that have decided to actually follow them. I personally don't follow them. Also, my teachers very much encourage, personally, I wouldn't follow them, but also my teachers very much encourage me to not follow them. Yeah, but there is no consistency. Like, it's really up to every community to decide how they want to follow, how they want to deal with those rules. And also there are actually also plenty of monks who say don't follow them because it also makes the monks uncomfortable, and they also see it's not authentic. And they think it's very, very detrimental to Buddhism also, because it puts a lot of women off, and it also puts a lot of men off. So yeah, it's not authentic, and it causes this obstacle for people to actually engage constructively with Buddhism, or to even have faith in Buddhism, or to practice properly. So there are also lots of monks and nuns out there who say don't follow them. Esther, yes, please go ahead.
No question, but a big thank you very much for the whole course. It was great. Thank you.
I'm glad you enjoyed it. I also enjoyed it very much. Yeah, I'm quite passionate about the ancient nuns, so I'm glad that some people were interested to join. Yeah, Tracy and Cindy, maybe Tracy first.
I'm curious, are you planning on, I know that some others have brought it up during the course, but are you planning on writing at all about the nuns, or are you planning on teaching again? What is your next course about to do?
So at the moment, I don't have any definite plans or definitive plans. I'm not planning to write it all out. Maybe I might write about a few things here and there, but I don't really have any specific plan. Also, at the moment, I don't have a plan for a new course. It depends. Do you have any suggestions? Are you interested in anything specific?
I'd be happy to, I just think I think anything that you're interested in, I imagine we would be interested in too. The choices have been so wonderful. And I know that at each of the sessions, you're like, oh, I don't have time to cover this. So I feel like there's plenty here, and it's like stories that I would be happy to keep hearing retold and and digging deeper into. So I think you just keep teaching this, but I, this is one of the great things is that you've introduced me to like a whole side of the text that I wasn't really aware of. Yeah, so I think just more of the same would be wonderful. I'll let others speak.
Okay. Thank you for your feedback, and we'll see how it goes. Like, I enjoyed the course. Maybe I'll just take a break for a few weeks or months, and I have your email addresses. So if anything comes up, I might send you an email. Cindy, did you have another question?
Hi, yeah, not a question, but yeah, I would be interested just to see if, yeah, you do have any further teachings. Also just wanted to say thank you for, yeah, uploading the recordings of your recitations of the Therīgāthā. So yeah, thanks for that. And I think, yeah, that did add to my appreciation of that, because yeah, hearing that in the original Pali language, it's quite special, and I can hear like, okay, this is how it sounds in that language, and there's like a certain rhythm to it. So yeah, thank you for that.
Yeah, I'm glad you appreciated it. I have a few more recordings, so if I have the time, I might upload a few more chapters.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. So I was wondering, did you have a favorite session, or did you have a favorite nun? Or was there anything that you especially appreciated about the course? Like, especially, did you have a favorite nun? I think that's my main question.
Yeah, I think Tulananda. Yeah, just the character, I guess. It's quite, I think, yeah, very courageous. Yeah, so the stories that we have in the text that we have, obviously these are texts that have been written down, and we know, I understand that the time of the Buddha and the Therīs that were around, it was more an oral language. So obviously, how many years down the track, and then it's written down, and depending on who wrote the story and what their take was on this person. So what we're getting has been filtered, obviously, and so yeah, I guess that's through this course I've learned that, okay, there are many aspects to like many parts of the story, and the stories behind the story has been really eye-opening, I think. Yeah, so thanks once again. Yeah.
Esther, yeah, please go ahead.
I had no special nun, which is at decision my favorite. But what I really enjoyed is how courageous and clear and you were. So this was for me the most precious thing, that there was a young bhikkhuni being so clear, so outspoken, and so systematic. Yeah, this was my favorite. You were my favorite. Thank you.
I'm glad you enjoyed the course, and I'm glad you enjoyed the presentation. It's somewhat maybe non-standard to present the text in this way, but I think there's just so many layers that are not being appreciated if you look at it in the traditional way. So I felt like there was a real need to actually start exploring this side of the text also. So I don't think we're at the end of the exploration. I think we're just beginning, actually. So this is a long path, and I think we should keep going. But definitely there are so many things that we should appreciate, or we can appreciate about the early nuns. So many sides that we don't look at because they're not the standard way of interpreting women in that time period. And also because if you don't bring many texts together, and if you don't bring many aspects together, you kind of can't appreciate the depth of some of those characters. And you can't really understand some of the stories if you don't know the background and the other stories around them. So yeah. Tracy, did you have a favorite nun?
I just agree with Esther so much. But I think that I just loved hearing about all the different, the fact that like these nuns weren't just like, kind of like, they weren't just like individual practitioners, they were also like teachers with followers and like sort of like part of the whole architecture of the sangha. I think that's really, really interesting. And, you know, while it shows like what was lost and that we don't have like the record of like what these different women teachers, like the ways that they were teaching, except in the ways that you showed us in the Therīgāthā, which I found fascinating to like look at the repetitions as ways of like seeing some of the teachings that were passed through through different women-led lineages. I think that just knowing that they existed and seeing like evidence for being able to read the Vinaya and other texts is like evidence that there were these thriving like female study communities is just super powerful and like makes me feel better, like honestly makes me feel better about Buddhism because it's it's just very encouraging to like see these in the early sources. So yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah, I think it's very important for women also to have role models in Buddhism. And because our texts are so male-centric, it's sometimes very difficult to identify with the practitioners then. And also, it seems sometimes that men have a very different approach to the practice, and that may not necessarily work for us so well. So I also find it very inspiring, and also to see how many different nuns there were in that time and how many different characters. So it seems like there was a place for everyone, and that kind of shows us that there might also be a place for us because we're also all different. Yeah. So I think this is maybe a good place to end. Thank you so much for coming. I so much enjoyed having you and teaching this class. So as usual, we will end with 3 sadhus. Feel free to join me if you'd like to join. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Thank you so much, and hopefully I'll see you again in another course.
Thank you.
Danke, Wiedersehen.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.